Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about 5 amazing games that I think are worth picking up on Steam Deck. This is the 5th episode in this series, so if you're interested in more games that I think are worth playing on Steam Deck, then please go and check out the full playlist. I'll put a link down below. So in this video we're starting with my favourite ever LEGO game, and that is LEGO Marvel Superheroes. I generally think that most LEGO games are great to play on Steam Deck, but this is the LEGO game that I've spent the most time with either on or off Steam Deck for a few key reasons. First of all, I'm a big Marvel fan anyway. I've got a big collection of comics from when I was younger. I absolutely love the Marvel movies when they were at their peak. Sure, some of them have fallen off a bit now, but I still like Marvel in general and superheroes. This game takes you all over the place. There's fan favorite heroes, amazing villains, and cool locations to go to. Second is just the sheer amount of content in this game. There's plenty of good sized levels and a whole open world to explore between those levels with so many things to find. There's an absolute huge number of characters, and yes, sure, sometimes they are quite similar to each other, but even when you've got a bunch of different Iron Man armors, they do have slightly different attacks to keep things varied. Once you beat the story missions for the first time, there are additional gold bricks to unlock, red bricks, power-ups, bonus levels. If you like collecting things, then you can spend a ton of time in LEGO Marvel Superheroes. The game, I think, also has a good sense of humor, and of course smashing things in these LEGO games is always really satisfying, and I think that LEGO Marvel Superheroes in particular finds a good balance between the old LEGO games and the new ones. So I was a huge fan of the original LEGO Star Wars as a kid, used to play that all the time with my brother, but that one nowadays, if you're trying to get back into it, can feel a bit clunky to play. And on the other hand, the new LEGO Skywalker Saga is much smoother, has much better combat, but it can kind of feel like you're really rushed through the levels, and I didn't think that the areas between the levels felt very good. And so I think LEGO Marvel Superheroes sits right in the middle of these. And I don't think they've ever quite managed to recapture the feeling of LEGO New York City from this game either. Being a 2013 game, this runs well on Steam Deck and it has great battery life. There's an occasional stutter in the open world that lasts for a few seconds, but then it's back to max frame rate pretty much all the time. And I've even played this docked at 1080p so that I can play at local co-op with my wife. It just runs really well. You're not going to have many troubles with this one. I enjoy that it's mission based as well, so you can just play in smaller chunks if you want. And then finally, it often goes on sale pretty cheap, but even when there's no sale on, it's only about £15. So if you've enjoyed any of the LEGO games before, I would happily recommend LEGO Marvel Superheroes on the Steam Deck. The next game is Deep Rock Galactic Survivors. Now, for the longest time, I actually thought that this was just an expansion for Deep Rock Galactic, which is a game that I've never played. I didn't realize that it was its own thing. I'm a big fan of Vampire Survivors, and a friend of mine recommended this to me with a very simple premise, which is that in Vampire Survivors, you get to a point that you're strong enough to just stand still. You don't really need to do anything. Deep Rock Galactic Survivors solves that in a few different ways. Each mission is a number of rounds, and between rounds you can buy power-ups using 2 types of ore. But these ores don't drop from enemy kills, instead you have to mine them from the environment, which forces you to walk around. Then during each round there's a bonus reward for collecting a number of objects. These change a little bit each time, but the premise is that it sends you all over the map if you want to find them all and get that experience. Mid-round there's also usually a powerful drop that spawns somewhere away from you. You have to go and find it. And finally, to complete the round you have to get back to your drill, otherwise it will go down to the next level and leave without you. Always being on the move does add to the gameplay, don't get me wrong, but there are other ways that this game pushes the envelope of what Vampire Survivors started as well. There are fewer characters to play as, but each one feels very unique. In Vampire Survivors, your character only dictates your starting weapon. You can then pick up pretty much any other power over the course of a round, whereas here, your character also defines which weapons you can get each time you level up. They build a specific way, and usually they feel pretty different. The engineer uses turrets and flamethrowers, and you have to pause running for just a second to get these to drop down next to you. On the other hand, the gunner's main weapon is a powerful minigun, but this will only fire in front of you. So if you play enough with each of these classes, they have different specs that you can unlock, and there's plenty of just content in general in the game. Biomes, difficulty levels, weapon-specific missions that if you complete will level up those weapons and make them more powerful. It runs pretty well on Steam Deck. The graphic style is a bit more demanding than a game like Vampire Survivors, so as the levels go on, you can drop FPS down towards the 30s and 40s, but I haven't found this to affect gameplay too much really. If you like any of the other Survivors games, then give this one a go. Dragon Age: The Veilguard released recently recently, but it doesn't run super well on Steam Deck. However, Dragon Age Inquisition runs wonderfully. Now, it is possible that when you launch this game, the controls won't work, and if so, there's a quick fix involving a custom Proton layer. It's not too complicated. I've made a video on it, so if it's not working for you, go and check that out. Once you get into the game though, everything runs really nicely, and you can journey in the world of Thedas on your handheld. This is a very in-depth RPG. There's loads of story, loads of world building, there's lore to jump into if that's what you're into. You form a party of characters and you can spend time getting to know your favorites, changing which ones you bring with you depending on how they fight, or maybe just because you like some of them more than others. That tends to be what I do. Some of these characters are from multiple Dragon Age games now, including some that have been brought forward into Veilguard, and there's multiple classes to choose from, there's decisions to make, there's so many side quests, and just generally cool things to discover. If you do get into this one, there are a lot of cool locations to visit, and the way I'd recommend playing is not necessarily trying to grind out all of the side quests in the starter zone straight away. When the game first came out, a lot of people bounced off it very quickly because they got burnt out trying to wrap up everything in the first zone before moving on, and instead I think it's better to have fun with the story for a little while, let it take you to a few different areas before you start to go back and finish all the extra activities. There are so many of these side quests that it will take you a long time. Dragon Age Origins is still my favorite Dragon Age game, but sadly there's not an easy way to get that running with Steam Deck controls. Inquisition changes the combat up a little bit and gives you a huge open world to explore. It looks and runs great on Steam Deck, so if you're thinking about getting into a deep RPG that you can play for hours and hours, then give this one a try. Core Keeper is a game that I discovered only recently, and it's one that I've been playing with my wife, and the entire time that we've been playing, we've both been on Steam Deck, and I just generally think this game fits really well on a handheld. If you've not heard of Core Keeper, it's a bit of a mix of some fan favorite games. I've heard it described as a mashup of Minecraft, Terraria, and Stardew Valley, and I would say that fits in very well. At the start of the game, you're unceremoniously dropped into an underground system of caves. There's a small cutscene to explain why, and that is the only hand-holding that the game gives you. From there you have to explore your surroundings, figure out the crafting mechanics, and also what's going on with the big glowing stone. Because Core Keeper is all about discovery, I don't want to spoil too much, and most of this footage is from the early stages of this game. It's generally really rewarding to slowly figure out everything that there is to offer here. To give you a general idea of what kind of things you might find, there's loads of different aspects of crafting, there's farming, there's leveling systems, different types of combat including magic and summoning, there's pets, there's awesome bosses, and just a whole load of secrets to discover. The game can be played with up to 8 players. We've just been playing it, the 2 of us, and we're having a great time. It can feel a little bit like you die easily sometimes, but there's no permanent penalty for death. You just drop your stuff and you can retrieve your items if you go back there. Only slight downside I would say to playing using Steam Deck controls is that it can be a little bit clunky using the bumpers to switch between your action bar. That's how you sort of get to your weapons or your pickaxe, for example, and so if you're in combat and you have to cycle through, it can take a few seconds to get to the weapon that you want. It's not usually an issue, but occasionally it does make you panic during combat. The game looks great otherwise on Steam Deck though. I really enjoy the pixel art style, and that art style does mean it runs fine on Steam Deck. You're not necessarily going to get maximum frame rate all the time, especially as you get more and more stuff for your base, but I don't think I've ever dipped below 40 frames, and given the type of game that it is, you don't really need any more than that, and the battery life is pretty good as well. Core Keeper is a bit of a hidden gem that's starting to become more popular, and it's starting to get the attention that it deserves. It's pretty cheap on Steam too, so give this one a go. The final game on today's list is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. I've done a whole video on this game, but on these lists I like to occasionally include games I've talked about before, just in case anybody's not seen the full video. Rift Apart was the first game that I properly dived into on my OLED, and I was really surprised how great it looks and how great it runs on that handheld. Being a Sony PS5 game, I was a little bit worried, but after turning FSR off on low settings, I really enjoyed my time with this game on Steam Deck. Sure, it won't look as good as on that home console PS5, but it still looks really good on a smaller screen, and you can get some decent frame rates. I'm a fan of Ratchet and Clank in general. I really like the 2 main characters, and I think the writing is often very funny in these games. A little bit immature sometimes, sure, but on the whole very funny. Rift Apart is no exception and introduces some new characters that feel right at home with the main lineup. You get to visit a range of interesting planets. The gameplay is a fun mix of shooting and melee combat, and there's a huge range of guns that you can try out, which all work very differently to each other. Rift Apart is generally very polished too. Sony games always are on PlayStation, but occasionally the PC port thought hasn't been quite up to scratch. Luckily though, that's just not the case here. This is possibly the prettiest game that I have ever played on Steam Deck. During cutscenes, the frame rate leaps up and any resolution scaling falls away, and it feels like you could be watching a Pixar film. It's a bright and colourful game too, so if you do have an OLED, it really shines on that screen. So there we have it. Those were 5 more games that I think are worth checking out on Steam Deck. If you want some more information on Ratchet and Clank, they do have that full video that you can have a look at, and just generally on my channel I have loads of videos talking about different games on Steam Deck. So if you are interested, maybe you've just got a Steam Deck around the Christmas time, then have a look at those. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.